Hey, welcome! Today, we are tackling one of the trickiest balancing acts in any kind of care setting, the tension between building trust through confidentiality and our absolute unwavering duty to keep people safe. Let's jump right in. So before we get into any of the tough calls or tricky situations, everything has to start right here. This quote from the AACC Code of Ethics, this is our foundation. Every single rule, every decision we make, it's all built on this one powerful idea, that every person we serve has innate worth and deserves to be treated with dignity. Think of it as our true north. So let me ask you this. What's that one promise that really opens the door for someone to heal? I think a lot of us would jump to, I promise that what you say here stays here. And that promise, it's absolutely vital. But, as we're about to see, taking that promise from an idea and applying it in the real world, well, that's where things get really complex. To get through that complexity, we need a really clear map. And that map starts with our words. Making sure we're all using the same words to mean the same thing isn't just about being nitpicky. When a crisis hits, that clarity is one of the kindest and most critical things we can offer. Okay, so it all starts with privacy. This is just a basic human right. Everyone, and I mean everyone, walks in the door with it. It's the baseline understanding that you get to control your own story and decide who gets a look into your personal life. Now, confidentiality is what we as professionals build on top of that right. See, it's not just a right the client has, it's an ethical duty that we actively take on. It's our promise that says, hey, this is a safe space. You can share your story here, and I am bound to protect it. This is really the bedrock of trust.
But, and this is a huge but, confidentiality is not the same thing as secrecy. We have to be crystal clear on this. Secrecy is more like a pact, an agreement to hide something, usually to protect somebody from the consequences. And in a recovery environment, it is so dangerous because it feeds right into the same unhealthy patterns as addiction, hiding things, creating these little alliances that just get in the way of real healing.
And that brings us to safety. This is the big one. This is our highest goal. Because while we build trust on the promise of confidentiality, our ultimate number one responsibility is to make sure our residents and the whole community are safe. And as we're about to see, this is the one principle that can, and sometimes must, override everything else. So let's just put these two side by side for a second. On one hand, you have confidentiality. It's professional, it's ethical, its entire purpose is to protect the client. On the other hand, you've got secrecy. That's usually personal and collusive. It's not about protecting the person, it's about protecting the secret itself, which can end up enabling really harmful behavior. Our job is to offer confidentiality and to always, always resist getting pulled into secrecy. So, how in the world do we know where the lines are? The good news is we're not just left to guess. We have guiding principles, like the ones right here in the AACC Code of Ethics. That's from the American Association of Christian Counselors. And you should think of this less like a rulebook designed to keep you out of trouble, and more like a source of wisdom that gives us a framework to handle these tough situations with real integrity. Now, a really key concept in the code is that the client is the holder of the privilege. What does that mean? It means it's their information. They own it. They get to decide who it's shared with. They can give us consent to share something, and they can take that consent away. The power is and should be in their hands. Well, most of the time. And this right here, this brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. That promise of confidentiality is sacred. It really is. But it is not absolute. There are very specific, very serious moments where our ethical duty has to pivot. This is the question, isn't it? The one that keeps caregivers up at night. What do you do when that trust you've worked so hard to build is on a direct collision course with the need to step in and protect someone? What happens when protecting their story could mean failing to protect their life? Well, our ethical framework gives us a very clear answer. When confidentiality and safety are at odds, our primary responsibility has to shift. Our promise of confidentiality has to take a backseat to what's known as the duty to protect. And this isn't really a choice we make, it's an ethical mandate. So, when does this duty kick in? Thankfully, the ACAC code is not vague about this at all. We are required, we must take action in these specific situations. First, if a client directly admits to serious and imminent threats of suicide. Second, if a client makes a direct threat of serious imminent harm against another specific person. And third, anytime there's a reasonable suspicion of abuse or harm against a child, an elder, or a dependent adult. These are the bright, uncrossable lines where our duty to protect takes over. Okay, let's pull this out of the textbook and put it into the real world. Because reading the rules is one thing, but applying them when you're under pressure, that's a whole different ballgame. Let's think this through. So picture this. A resident you've built a really strong connection with pulls you aside and tells you she's been self-harming. She's obviously terrified. And she makes you promise not to tell anyone, even saying that if you break her trust, she's done. She'll never trust anyone there again. Your heart is screaming to honor that trust. But everything you've been trained to do is sounding a massive alarm.
All right, first question for you. What's the fundamental conflict here? It's pretty clear, right? On one side, you have the principle of confidentiality and all the trust you've built. And on the other, you have this direct admission of self-harm, which immediately triggers that core principle of safety. Okay, now think back to what we just talked about. When those two principles are in direct conflict, where does the code of ethics point you? Well, any talk of self-harm has to be taken seriously, and it falls right under that umbrella of a serious and imminent threat. That means your primary responsibility shifts immediately from confidentiality to your duty to protect.
And so, for the final and maybe most important question, what do you actually do next? Because knowing your duty is one thing, but acting on it is another. This isn't just about tattling. It's about how you have that conversation with the resident, who you report to on your team, how you document it, and how you follow up to make sure a whole circle of care is wrapped around this person. The goal isn't just to break confidentiality. It's to break it with the clear purpose of getting them the help and protection they need. And that, right there, is what it means to provide truly ethical care.